Okay, so now we've got some data in our travel E environment. What we'd like to do is go and mask that data. So there's a couple of ways of going and masking databases. In fact, there's probably 3 or 4. I'm going to do it with our standalone client Fast Data Masker. You could do it as part of the subsetting process, and I'll talk through some of that. There are certain components that you need to be installed and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is this is going to be a in-place data masking video, and I'm going to create another one that's an in-flight masking video. So I'm going to stick with people for the moment. So these are the people that we're going to go and mask. We essentially need to create a routine to secure them and so on and so forth. For that, you'll need Fast Data Masker. Fast Data Masker should be installed as part of the installation process. Now, what we need to do is create a connection. If you create something that looks a little bit like this, so it needs to be called connect, and then the database you're going to go and mask just for going and finding it purposes. In this case, this one is, oh, actually I need to create a SQL one, so maybe we'll actually go and create a SQL version. So if we just copy connection and connect travel E, I'll call this one SQL. Those are underscores in between there. So my server or instance is like so, my username is like so, and ooh, that's not how you type in my password. Like so. We will encrypt that so that it's secure, so on and so forth. So travel E and give it a save. Once you've created that, you select connect, and it should hopefully launch into the tool. Now if you get an error at that point, obviously go and see what connection you've put in wrong. Now Fast Data Masker is, there's a huge amount of different masking routines and ways that we can mask. I'm just going to go through the basics, and then I'll let you you can go and explore and play around and see what you think works and so on and so forth. So people, that's the table I want to go and mask. You're going to move it in by these little arrows. It then gives you a tab at the top. You can apply where conditions into this tab. So if you wanted to say where my ID is equal to 10, for example, or so on and so forth, you can apply different types of masking to different kind of variants. So if you've got a gender column, you might want to do, mask my genders that are male with male names and so on and so forth. We're going to be pretty blanket in this approach though. We then go and choose our column, first name. We're going to go and pick from one of the many things we can do. We're going to go and choose rand.lov. Now you can connect from a file or from a database. I would suggest you try both. If I go from file, locally you have installed within your app data a set of seed lists. They can all be kind of moved around to different servers and that sort of stuff if you need. So we could potentially come in and just choose first names. Makes sense. That's basically a masking routine that will go and mask that column right now. If you go from database, you have to create another connection file. So you create a connection as you did to when you launched the tool. If you come to settings, reset connection. I won't do that. If you say yes, it puts you back to that screen. From the drop down list, you'd go and connect to one of your environments. Now, there is an environment called Connect Scramble. It is part of the database installation kit. If you install that, you should be able to then go and connect to it using using kind of an appropriate user, and you can go and validate that. Scramble has got a lot of data inside it. It's got a lot of ways that we go about masking. You will also need it if you want to do subset kind of in-flight masking. So if you want to pause this video and just go and install that, go do that. It's just a backup file. Go load it into SQL Server, and off you go. Similar-ish for Oracle. It'll just be a user and so on and so forth. Inside there, you've got a set of tables. So for example, GTSRC reference data has data categories in. So it's got more in terms of, it's got more data content. I believe it's also quicker to mask using from a database. And you can also have multi-column seed lists going on. So for example, first name first name and title, the first column is going to be first name and the second column is going to be title. Now, you're obviously welcome to go into this database, have a look at these in this particular table. If you do a group by on the data categories, you'll be able to see all the different stuff that you've got in there and just a sampling of the sort of things. So if customers asking for, hey, we've got our own customized data, typically we'd build them a seed list inside a database somewhere for them to go and mask with. Now, I'm just going to go from file just for the moment, just because it's very straightforward. I'm going to do first names and last names for the moment. I'm going to do them both randomly. So these functions, there are lots of them. Now you have to be sensible in what you pick. So for example, if I if I just delete them, or if I put in something to do with the date of birth that's going to adjust my date of birth or adjust my date of death, that sort of stuff, doesn't necessarily make sense for a first name or a last name. So, you know, got to be a little bit sensible. If your character type is numeric or something different, it will try and suggest the best that it can, so the best list possible, but certain things do have overlay and overlap depending what you're trying to do. So random functions are going to do things randomly. Hashing functions will try and do things consistently, so if you need to mask across databases consistently, hashing functions go and do that. Sequential will start at the top of a list and sequentially move its way through until the end. If you go through the dockup site, there's plenty of different examples for what these things are actually doing, so I'm not going to spend too much time there. In this case, I'm just going to mask my first and my last names like so, and that's good enough to go and save and run. So you'll notice there's not a save button on this page. The save button is actually on the summary page. But before then, we've got restartability and options to get through. So restartability, so you can, if you are masking a large volume of data, you can set a flag that will indicate that where we kind of got to in the process. So say we're doing 1 billion rows and we get to 500 million and then it all falls over. We don't want to have to start from 0. We want to start from 500 million because we've done half the work. So you can set a restart flag to go and do that. We'll try and basically add a column onto a table that says this is a flag, and essentially it's a checkbox. Some customers allow you to do that, some customers don't. It depends. It typically just depends. Options is probably one of the most important tabs on here. So there's lots of options that go alongside the masking. So I would really recommend using some of these options. The descriptions are typically self-explanatory and give you exactly what's going to happen. So before you run any mask, and you may have already done it, you may have jumped the gun, masking is sometimes far too easy. That sounds stupid, but it is. What I mean by that is, if you go and mask a database, it is masked. So if you start running this against the wrong environment and you don't really realize, or you're not too sure that randLib is going to do the right job and you need to do something else, once you've run it, it's occurred. And therefore, to undo that, you have to remove all the data and reload it in from source. Okay, so be a bit careful. The way that I would suggest you are careful is by using row number 19 DB updates and just put a little n in here. So that will run it in simulation mode. Now, that's really a best practice. When you're on your own test system, or as I am here, I'm very lackadaisical with that, because I know that, as we did in the data subsetting, it takes 2 seconds to go and import some more data. But for customers, and when we're talking to customers, we want to make sure that simulation mode is almost a default. You want to take it out of simulation mode to actually go and run something. There's also lots of audit bits and pieces at the top, so make sure you just have a play around with, auditing, sampling certain rows, so on and so forth, checking out your CSV files, and as you see, the different things that you add in here will also, for example, if we actually went from a database, these would auto populate for me. There's lots of things you can do in here. Again, very similar to the functions. Have a bit of a look, have a bit of a play around, try doing some processing on parallel threads. Try getting yourself some pre-steps and post-steps. So a pre-step to drop some foreign keys, a post-step to re-enable them, and that sort of stuff. Dates, override today's date. If you're doing a date of birth function, simulate it to be in 2010 or 2070 rather than now. Once you've set those things, so I'm going to go totally against what I just said about simulation, just so we can go and view it. And I'm just going to go and run this. So this is essentially what the old mapper used to look like. So what the old masking functions. So this kind of new interface allows you to build this. This technically in the background is just a CSV file. Alongside the CSV file is a connection file and any other various assets that it goes and builds for us. Once we've built this, you can check it to make sure you're happy with it. You can create a little batch file, so you don't have to come into the tool every time. You can just run your batch files and off it goes. Now we're just going to save and run it. So in this case, I'm going to call this one people. Sensible naming conventions are helpful. Save it and let it go do its thing. Now this will run through incredibly quickly because there's like 20 records. It's hyper performant anyway. I use the word hyper performant a lot when it comes to our masking because we are super quick at it. The things that alter your masking times are obviously the amount of records you have to mask, the machine that you are on, and the functions that you are using. So if you're using lots of wheres, if you're using lots of hashing, it will obviously slow down. There are ways to help speed that up by using things like parallelization and so on and so forth. But just for some training purposes, this should be absolutely fine. Now, if you've done something wrong, it will stop you before it does any masking. So if it can't connect to the database, if your license is wrong, if you're interesting, my license is going to run out soon. So on and so forth. There's various things that this will tell you, and actually when it comes to debugging, typically very helpful in terms of what version are you on, what you're trying to do, so on and so forth. It will then tell you things like, so we're going to mask the people table and this column. We're going to randomly pick from a seed list, and it will be from first names. So it's really just step by step all the way through, very straightforward in terms of what's happening, and it's going to go and done that for us. So if I come into my database and we'll run that, you can see that it's changed. So it's changed these names for us. How do we know that it's changed? By typically I would I've run a new query, but I totally forgot to do that then. But I do notice that my email address is wrong. So, email address. How do I now potentially go and include that so that these things kind of all tie up? So I'm going to go and alter my function. I'm going to go and choose email address, and I'm going to go and do something like a concat. I'm going to use masked values, which means it's going to use the values that it masks these little guys with, and I'm going to put in my columns. So first name, let's put in a dot, last name, and let's get everyone to work for CA, like so. Give it a save and a run. Now if I've done something stupid there, it will tell me at this point. Seems happy with it, marvelous. So now what I'll get is Charlie Estrada is going to change, it's going to be remasked. I should get that to say Rebecca Cruioff. And in here, okay, so my last name is wrong. So when I said run it in simulation mode, this is exactly the reason why, because I've done something wrong here, and I've actually misnamed the column. So third time lucky, and off we go. Let's let it do that. Basically, by the time it gets here, that should be done. And there we go. So Richard Stevens at ca.com. Hurrah! Now, there are data consistencies and data, so cross relational integrity is what I'm talking about. So people often want to mask so things are relationally intact. So in this case, I do recognize that my people table has a link to a credit cards table, but there's nothing really in there that is exciting, as it were. Now, if I look at my data source, because that's where I've got my relationships, we might find something. I think we may have something in employees that we could potentially use. So if we just do a little query, so select from people where the emp no. So if I look at my column, I've got a little link there, my emp no is in, and I'll just select everything from, no, yeah, I'll select everything from employees, sorry, the employee ID. So I wasn't going to cover consistency in this, but if I've got some data, is it not called employees? Sure, I've got an employees table. Oh, I don't. I've made it. Oh, maybe that's in a different environment. Sorry. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a pretend consistency. So, for example, we want my first name and my last name to be the same. That's our scenario in this case. The last name could be in a different table. In this case, unfortunately, I haven't got a different table that actually is good for this. So maybe it was HST employees. Anyway, wait, I say anyway. Name. If I have data in here, which I do I have a link between my ID in and select? So actually, as random as this seems, this isn't too far off what would actually go on site. Because I don't know a huge amount about this database that we've got going on. Okay, so I don't have any, there's not actually any data in there. All right, so what I'm just going to do is pretend first name and last name. So what I was saying was, when you do come on site and you talk to customers about this sort of stuff, typically they don't know where their PII data is or where they need to remain consistent, and it's very iterative and learning as a process. It's why there's a heavy focus often on what the profiler can do and come back and tell us and that sort of stuff. So I'm just going to alter my masking functions, and instead of using rand LOV, I'm going to use hash LOV. So hash will consistently pick from a seed list for me. So again, I'll choose first names, and I have to choose an ID to kind of hash on. So I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. I always struggle with the best way of explaining this, but like so. So basically what I'm trying to say is I want my first name and my last name to always be the same. Now in this case we'd assume that last name is in another table, maybe in another database. What we're saying is that they have a link, so they've got a join on the ID, and that ID can be essentially anything as long as it is the same. Now you can use, for example, the first name itself, but if I'm known as Ben in one table and Benjamin in another, actually that will lose. They are two different words, right? Although we might see them as the same, they are two different words. So what hashing does, and this is the way that I've typically explained it, I've got a column 1, so let's do it this way. So I've got table 1, column 1, and its first name. And I've got another table, so I've got table 2, column 1, and it's also a first name. So these guys are going to be joined on an ID. My ID is going to be 123, for example. What we do is we take that ID and we go and associate it to a seed list. So on that seed list we might have names like Dave, Tom, and Gary. And what we're going to say is that whenever you find this ID, it's going to go and use its algorithm to say go and pick Dave. So essentially, wherever it finds 123, it goes and turns it into Dave, and we get consistent records. Now, this as a process and this as a seed list, as long as that seed list doesn't change, you will always get a consistent result. That's the way that the hashing algorithm works. So as long as the ID is valid for both of these tables and columns, and as long as the seed list, say we've got 1,000 names in there, as long as it remains 1,000, 123 will always turn into Dave. Okay, so proof's in the pudding. So I've set hash LOV first name. It's going to go and look at the keys in here, and we're going to go and save and run that mask. Huzzah! So it's gone and updated those 22 rows. Now, so Richard Stevens is going to change to something else. Charles, Christine, so on and so forth, because they've both got the same IDs. Okay. Now, again, feel free to find a good example inside this database that's not just on the same columns. feel free to try and do it with numbers, not just characters, essentially. And one thing you could do is you could add, once you've done the data generation piece, you could generate some names into employees and into people, and then you could come back and mask those and demonstrate the consistencies and that sort of stuff. Now, the other way that we build maps is not just using FDM. You can come up here and build transformation maps. So exactly the same sort of process. So we'd create a map. We would potentially, it's not for Oracle, it is for SQL Server. We would call it people. It's our people map, so on and so forth. Give it a save, and we actually want that one. We're going to choose our people table in the list, and again you're just going to choose whatever function you want to go and do, so whatever it is that we go and pick, like so. Once you've done that, you can save those settings, and then you import sorry, that's importing the existing one. Save, and then import as CSV SDM. Now, a little bit of history. FDM used to be called SDM. That will still work. The CSV will also still work. So you can export these and load them into FDM to go and run. The reason you build these transformation maps is more for database subsetting and masking at the same time, which is something we'll cover later, which is why I've gone through this at hyper speed. So for the moment, I'd focus on FDM, and then when I do a subset and mask at the same time video, we'll run through transformation maps a little bit more.